Thanks a lot, Mick. Thanks also for the invitation. It's not the easiest of titles or tasks, but I like the topic because clearly we're facing a food systems conversation that's unbalanced, asymmetric, and especially divisive. And I think there are three reasons that we can identify. Next slide, please. So the first reason is that we see a clash between top-down and bottom-up visions. And the top-down one is basically calling for a highly interventionist, great food transformation or great reset, as you wish to call it. Now, even if it appears to be inclusive, this mostly narrows down diversity and a range of possible interventions to preconceived ideas, such as a planetary health diet or a half a planet approach. So my concern is that such interference with very complex systems, the food system being very complex, may lead to trouble because systems will always kick back in manners that are unpredictable. Now, history has shown that. It's just that we usually forget about our history. Now, although some top-down elements may be useful through policy interventions, a more careful bottom-up tinkering with the system is much to be preferred, in my opinion. Now, second, I'm worried about the corporate takeover of the United Nations Food System Summit by the likes of the World Economic Forum and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And I'm far from being alone. Similar concern has been stated by the UN Special Rapporteurs on the Right to Food, by several grassroots organizations. And third, the current conversation is built on unstable foundations. So one of the problems, but there are many others, is that it spans an irrational animal-plant divide, whereby plants are presented as mostly beneficial for us and animal source foods almost as intrinsically harmful, intrinsically to be reduced. Whereas in reality, of course, we have both harmful and beneficial examples and practices on both sides of that artificial binary. Now, the issue here is that it diverts our attention from the actual root causes. So it distracts us from the actual root causes, being the hyper-extractive production methods and a Western diet that is centered around ultra-processed foods. So those are three internal contradictions, three tensions: bottom-up versus top-down, corporate control versus grassroots community movements, and animals versus plants. Next slide, please. So the problem is structural, and let me be provocative, and this may offend some people, but I'm personally not very enthusiastic about the Sustainable Development Goals. Not that they are wrong, but they kind of dilute the message. In my opinion, we'd benefit from a more humanistic approach, looking into what humans truly need. And that's where the model of Maslow becomes useful. And people that know me know that I often mention it because it identifies a gradient from biological needs over social needs to individual needs in a hierarchical manner. And food is extremely important at all the entry points of this pyramid. Now, food is a foundation for human health, for communities, and for expression. But we need to approach it wisely, as is fit for a Homo sapiens. And in other words, we need to carefully assess how to produce and how to consume food. So even if it's human-centered, planetary health and sustainability are intrinsically part of this. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, it seems that our Western society has gotten it upside down, whereby we have forgotten about the fundamentals and we have been taking them for granted in a foodscape of abundance. And we can find cheap food at any moment of the day. The problem is that it tends to be the wrong kind of food, of course. But on the other hand, we excessively focus on the need for status and the need for self-actualization or self-development, which is amplified by the whole social media culture, the likes and whatever comes with it. And it takes a crisis to realize that this is a very unstable system, that this is a very wobbly kind of upside down pyramid. COVID, for instance, has confronted us with our poor metabolic health, with our fragile supply chains, with our eroded communities, and the distress we undergo due to class anxieties and class tensions and loss of purpose. And such a climate easily results in scapegoating mechanisms and in moralizing mob behavior and all sorts of authoritarian reflexes. And just look around you and read the news and you know what I'm talking about. Next slide. If we're not careful, things may become worse still. If we get this great food transformation wrong, it may lead to even more ultra-processed foods, more nutrient deficiencies, to an even increased control over the food chain by a small set of corporations, becoming more centralized, more specialized, more patented, more fragile. And it will lead to a further loss of food culture. It puts more emphasis on moral eating and pointing fingers to each other's dietary choices and all of the polarization that comes with that. Next slide. Now, a successful approach, on the other hand, should come up with rebalancing corrections, starting from the foundations and working its way upwards. And I'm generally convinced that animal agriculture has its role to play and its stories to tell. And John just did a fantastic job in showing how that can be done. And as such, it can facilitate essential nutrition. Diana talked about it, and it can help to improve resilience and therefore food security by improving soil health and by offering synergies with crop agriculture. And you could come up with thousands of examples. It can help to reappreciate food traditions in which animal source foods hold very specific and important positions. Don't forget that sharing food is a cornerstone of human communities. It always has been, we're just losing it. And it may also create a renewed sense of pride, and we urgently need that as well. It may even be a learning path for cultural and scientific development, both for the group and for the individual. And but I would say that the livestock sector, however, will have to acknowledge the fact that we are dealing with a pharmacon, which means that livestock and animal source foods are both beneficial and they're harmful. They're both of that. And we have to assume responsibility if we're promoting livestock by maximizing the benefits and by trying to minimize the negative impact. Next slide. So, which brings me to my conclusions. So the food system conversation is mostly undermined by hubris, by vested interest, and by ideology. And this creates a one-sided environment, which makes it very difficult to have this balanced and inclusive discussion. Now, some of the loudest solutions are emphasizing the top-down interventionism based on modeling and simplistic metrics and all kinds of simplistic assumptions, which may potentially lead to some dystopian outcomes. And we should think this through. And instead, we may need to prioritize those bottom-up solutions, the basics, healthy soils, healthy animals, healthy humans that would integrate rather than oppose the best of plant and animal agriculture, using what James Scott has called metis, referring to an ancient Greek word, which means practical wisdom rather than technocracy. Practical wisdom to combine the safety net of traditional heritage with the innovative potential of science and technology. Both can go together. Actually integrating both is a much more robust way forward than focusing on one and forgetting about the other one. But animal agriculture, the role of animal agriculture needs to be more visible. That's clear. It needs to be more visible and more explicit. And the sector will have to show why it cannot be removed from healthy and sustainable food systems, why it cannot be substituted by the imitation foods, the so-called alternatives, and make sure that policymakers understand that and that the public understands that. Because frankly, the current information is insufficient. Thank you, and I'm happy to enter discussions later on.